What's up, y'all? It's Bethany and Dave here, and I'm really excited. The other week, there was a comment made by a prominent figure within the conservative movement about pornography that caused quite the stir up. And I don't know, I think I sent you the clip. I don't know how we both came across it. Yeah. And then you just texted me like a bunch of thoughts you had. And so I went live on Instagram, on the Girl Defined Instagram, and you said I could read your thoughts live. And a bunch of you were like, how can we get those thoughts? Like, do you have bullet points of what Dave shared? It really resonated with you. And so I asked Dave, I was like, hey, can we make this more permanent? Like your thoughts, can we share them somewhere so that more people can hear them? And you said yes. So here we are.
Yeah, but we're making a big deal about how these are my thoughts currently at the moment. I don't know if in the intro you said a man's perspective. So the
your man's, I mean,
it would be on one man's perspective.
Yes, a man, your perspective. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's it because, Dennis Prager is who we're talking about. He's the one, he runs Prager University, and he shared thoughts on pornography that caused quite the stir. So he is just one man. Those are his thoughts. Everyone has their own thoughts, obviously. So these are our thoughts. And I mean, I have thoughts and you have thoughts, and they're not always the exact same. But I think that it's, pornography is it's so a part of our culture, even though, I don't know, more people are talking about it. It's like Christian, secular people are talking about pornography and whether it's good or not, beneficial or not. And I don't think we've ever had a conversation on the Girl Defined podcast where we brought a man on to talk specifically about pornography. So I think this is the first. Welcome.
Thank you. So do you think, why do you think it's becoming such a talking point? Because it's not just Christians or conservative Christians that are talking about porn these days. It's a whole ethical conversation.
Totally.
And then there's the question of a couple things. The question of the industry itself.
For sure.
And the incentive structures that comprise that industry and the market that's created and what you're contributing to if you're supporting that market. Yeah. But then there's the question of whether or not it is beneficial or moral or amoral or immoral for personal consumption.
I don't even know what all those mean besides immoral.
Does it have, basically, is it bad?
Yeah.
Wrong? Is it wrong to do? Is it right to do? Or is it just not right or wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously, Girl Defined comes from a Christian worldview. We have talked a lot about what we believe the Bible has to say about pornography or lust or whatever, all of that. So we have created episodes more specifically on that. And we take a deep dive into that in our book, Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart. That's the book Kristen and I wrote together. But I think it's really cool, the points you brought up. And so they're different than what Kristen and I have shared. And a lot of them are just like talking points that you could use to communicate with or to think through without necessarily coming from a Christian worldview, which is really interesting because, like you were saying, it is a topic that's becoming more relevant. And I mean, I've had conversations with people who are not Christians, who are not religious, other women even on the podcast that we've had on. We didn't necessarily have this conversation here, but I've talked to them and seen their stuff on Instagram, and they're against using pornography in your marriage or as a single. And they're basically like, they don't even talk about all the research behind it. They're like, oh yeah, we just know, we know it now in 2023, when this podcast is being recorded, we know pornography basically doesn't have any good uses. And they're just saying that as like a secular, not coming from a Christian perspective. I mean, I think some of the research, as far as it having been out for a while now and people being able to, I don't know, see the results of it, I think that has something to do with it, the impact on people's lives now that enough time has gone by.
Yeah. What I'm seeing a lot of guys talking about, the impact it has on their sex lives, the impact it has on, the expectations they come to a sexual relationship with, as well as impeding their ability to get a bunch of stuff done in their life or build businesses or do, so there's a lot of conversation around the benefits. I would almost say a lot of the conversation I'm hearing is more like, is it harmful? So if it's not harmful and you like it, then, do what you like. But
That's
I think
what people are saying.
Yeah, that's what people would say. I think that a lot of the question now for many people, many men that I'm hearing, is this going to be bad for me? As well as the question of, is this harmful to the people that are being marketed or who are marketing themselves? But I actually hear that a lot less.
Yeah.
A lot of guys are sort of putting that off to the side, especially if you're not, particularly Christian or conservative, just sort of putting that off to the side and saying, is this good for me?
Yeah.
Is this actually beneficial for my own life, for my goals, for my sex life?
What's the general consensus with what you listen to?
For what I listen to, the general consensus, I think, is porn in combination with masturbation as a kind of tension release valve is largely is not the most helpful in actually developing yourself as a man and doing the things in the world, being successful.
For sure.
Whatever you think about financial, business, relational success, it seems like there's a lot of conversation around how masturbating with porn, the quick tension release style, is not so helpful.
Yeah.
That's the sense I'm getting. I'm not saying one way or another.
Yeah.
And as a Christian, obviously it's not simply, does this benefit me and make me successful or not? Or is this harmful or not? It's more, what is right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was the crux of why people were kind of upset with Dennis Prager, was because he was not super solid on that answer and kind of, I don't know.
Yeah. My takeaways from him that kind of sparked me to write down some thoughts were a couple of things. One was, I'm trying to think, saying, if his initial comments, if porn is being used in lieu of your spouse, then it's bad or it's awful.
Yeah.
But if it's being used in addition to your spouse, then it's not awful. Those are his original comments or something.
That's
like
what
that.
infuriated people.
That's what people were like, what? And he, it sounds like he doesn't love how that came out, and he's done a lot to try to clarify what he means. So then the second thing that struck me was his conceptualization of the internal world, as he calls it, your internal world versus your behavior. So he makes a distinction between what goes on inside and what you actually act on. And he says that in Judaism, it's a behaviorist religion. So there are a lot, which he is Jewish. So he would say, he says that what Judaism says is that what matters is your behavior, not necessarily the internal thoughts that you're having. So I think when he clarified, he made the big distinction there. That was more.
Well, and he talks a lot about how Christians and him disagree on that.
Yeah,
right?
because Jesus says, if you look on a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery already in your heart. Yeah. So
he doesn't agree.
He says, well, that's not, that's not in Torah.
Yeah.
He said covet, there's a big difference between lust and covet, lust being this idea of sexual. He also doesn't make a distinction, which many Christians make a distinction between sexual desire and lust. So what I've heard is Christians will say, sexual desire is sort of that initial attraction you can't control, and lust is what you do with that.
Yeah.
So, which I'm not 100% sure how that all works. I know that growing up, I had an enormous amount of confusion as to where that line was.
Yeah.
And if you really start to think about it, it's like, okay, well, what kind of response time do you need to have? Is it like an initial, no, get that thought out of here? Or is it like awareness of the thought and moving on? I just think that a lot of a lot of Christians, conservative Christians, seem to have it worked out. And I think when Dennis Prager says he doesn't see a distinction so much between lust and sexual desire, I'm actually, of all the points he made, I'm actually more inclined to be friendly towards that, even though I haven't quite landed.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? What are your thoughts on that? Yeah. What do you teach?
No, I mean, we just had a whole conversation about this in a previous podcast, all on like sexual fantasy, lust as married women. And that was super, it actually brought up a lot of conversation on the Girl Defined podcast because on our Instagram and stuff, because we were talking about how it's true. You don't just like when you get married, when you're single, whatever, but you're not like a robot. You don't walk around and be like, oh my goodness, I do not notice any attractive people. It's like we all experience that, where like God created us as sexual beings. We're designed to feel and experience attraction, but we just, okay, you could get into the really nitty gritty details out of it. At the bottom line, I just think, what do you do with that? And do you go into that and be like, ooh, this is nice. Ooh, I'm going to imagine a future with this person. Ooh, I'm going to start to build this for women, like an emotional relationship with this person. I'm going to fantasize this at night. I'm going to bring that person into my marriage. When I'm being intimate, I'm thinking of that person, like I think that's lust and sin and wrong. So it's like, I think that it's natural for us to notice other people or to, see someone and be like, wow, they're attractive, but just like, what do you do with that? I don't know. It's hard because I think it's impossible to be like, I do not notice a single other person. It's like, I think God made us that way. I don't think we have to be ashamed of that, but I think that we just have to be aware that we're that way and be careful with not going down that road. What do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely think that I think that, what do I think? I think that we tend to focus on that. I think we tend to focus on what's sin and what's not. And
as compared
to a more holistic view of our sexuality as a force, an energy that we can actually direct and develop.
An energy.
An energy, absolutely, yeah. And
okay, so do you think it's okay to, like, is it okay for me to be like, oh, I see, an attractive man running. Let me think about that. Yummy.
Well, between the time that you say, let me think about that, yummy, and you see him, what's happening? It's like, I think that if you feel that attraction, right? You feel that attraction.
Yeah.
At what point is it like becoming that, let me think about having sex with that man? It's like, in my own, internal world experience, a lot of my own thoughts about an attractive female have not been thinking through a sexual act.
Yeah. Well, same. I'm not
and yet at the same time, how, if you're thinking of their beauty or you're looking at aspects of their body, for example, and appreciating the beauty of that, there's a question of, is that reducing them to something that's simply feeding something inside you? So I think that's really important. How are we treating each other in our own mind?
For sure.
But I think that the line, at least in my mind, the line has been very blurry between that appreciation of someone's beauty and physical beauty, personality even, and all of that together, and then taking them to bed in your mind. Yes. And I think that there's a lot in between those two.
For sure. Oh my gosh.
And I'm more interested in what's happening between those two.
Okay.
And I'm interested in the development of how are we directing our sexuality. Yeah. I see our sexuality as something that from puberty onward, or even earlier onward, it's like, this is something that is developing.
Yeah.
And this is something that it's not simply a drive.
Yeah.
It is part of being human. Human sexuality is not animal sexuality like 100%. All the other animals. We have a prefrontal cortex that can,
Yeah, I agree.
So sexuality for us is not simply a drive; it's a meaning,
for sure,
infused aspect,
totally
integral aspect to who we are.
Yeah,
and I think that kind of ties into where my thoughts were coming from.
Yeah.
I
think it's we've had a lot of conversation, and then we'll get into your points because your points are so good and they really clear up like so much of what we're talking about. But I think that it's been interesting to talk about you growing up as like a teen boy into your early 20s and just the struggle you felt of like you can clarify, but like what you've shared with me is like you finding yourself attractive or thinking about a girl and being like, oh my goodness, I'm sinning, and feeling so much guilt and shame over that,
or having a physical response, and wondering if I was so disconnected. Like my anxiety's over here, the rest of my thoughts are over here, my body's over here, and they are just so separated. There was so much confusion.
Just sad. We've talked a lot about
for years. And it's just constantly conditioning myself to be, filled with confusion. And actually to the point really where sad. Eventually as a young, I was in my early 20s, I started having conversations with other guys. I had multiple conversations trying to figure out what's normal and what's sin and what's not. And it took a lot of those conversations. So if you're a parent, be proactive.
Which
are, my parents were proactive to a point, but I think that there just was still a lot of confusion.
We have a son and a daughter, and there are so many great resources now. We attended a little seminar. I think it's the Birds and the Bees who puts it out. I'll link some stuff if you're parents. We have some books that we've gotten that we both read with Davey, and they're just simple, like age appropriate conversations, ways that you can start to bring up this, these conversations. Simple stuff like using anatomically correct language about with your kids, basic things like that, that are so helpful in many ways. So there's a lot we could go down as far as that goes. But when we have conversations about that, it makes me sad to think of you as like a young man struggling with so much anxiety, when God created us as sexual beings and it's a good and beautiful thing. And there is right context for it. And he does have a good plan for it, and struggling so much because there's just confusion between the body and the mind and all of that. That's just hard. Nancy Piercy, we love her. She's great. Her book, I think, Love Thy Body, helps clear up a lot of this sort of thing, how Christians have separated the mind from the body. That book, I think, is really helpful with unpacking some of this, even though she goes into a lot of other conversations. That's been super helpful for me. I just started reading her book, Saving Leonardo. And I've been telling Dave, I'm like, this book is blowing my mind. It's just, so if you come from, you have a lot of confusion, I don't know, in your upbringing as a Christian, or you're even new to the Christian faith. I think her book, Saving Leonardo, is like, where have I been all my life? I'm so excited to finish it. And I recommend it because I'm such a fan of Nancy Piercy. And even though I haven't finished it, I have been a huge fan of pretty much everything I've come across of hers. So anyway.
Which one of the things she talks about is, one of the main things she talks about is sort of the development of that mind-body split. And that is not just a Christian thing. It's a cultural thing. It's a modernist, project kind of thing. And I think that a lot of issues have arisen in our culture and then in our subcultures, Christian subcultures, etc., because we have conceptualized the body and the mind as so separate. And the body is sort of like, in the Christian, largely conservative Christian sense, the body is bad in a lot of ways. The body is something we get freed from or something, which is a not, pagan idea, and not a Christian idea. and that what really matters is our beliefs. What really matters is our internal world. So whereas other understandings would be like the body is where it's at. And, our understanding through our culture has largely been, it's all what happens up here. Yeah. And I actually started getting that idea, even as I talk to guys and stuff. It's like, okay, your body's responding this way, but as long as your mind, is this way, then, it's okay. It was still a very separated, bifurcated view. Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's jump into your points. So these are thoughts about really, is it men and women in pornography use, or more from a man's perspective?
I haven't thought a lot about women using porn.
So it's more from the perspective of a man viewing pornography, and your thoughts as one man.
Yeah. So in these thoughts, I talk about some possible causes. These aren't the only reasons why a guy could be looking at porn.
Got it.
But they're sort of what came to my mind. Okay.
Go for it.
All right. The first one is porn consumption is as a symptom of a deeper problem. Porn consumption is often a symptom of a lack of self-direction. Rarely is a compulsive porn habit simply a result of a guy looking for variety. More often, it is a stress response as he is unable to manage his internalized rage. This self-directed anger manifests as compulsive habits and procrastination. Much of porn use happens in tandem with procrastination, which is rooted in a sense of masculine powerlessness. The more a man does not move out into the world with his healthy, God-given masculine energy, the more he will be attracted to compulsive behavior, porn, drink, etc., and suffer the loop of shame that follows. His sense of powerlessness will reinforce his compulsion, which in turn will reinforce his sense of powerlessness. So you see the vicious circle there.
Okay. I like that.
Okay, the second one is, do you want to talk about them as we go, or just kind of fly through them?
Let's see. What do you think? We'll figure it out right now.
Yeah. So the first idea is basically about self-direction. Yeah. That oftentimes this habit, it's like, I need this thing to kind of help relax me or help.
Yes.
Me. It's a symptom. It's like you might hate yourself. You might be so disappointed. And so you can actually use those internal cues. Actually, they can become a gift to tell you something about yourself. Yeah. If you're a guy.
I think that we often look at the symptoms and we go, okay, if we just get rid of the porn.
Kick the porn. Well, if you don't deal with the underlying problem, issue. You're just going to replace that with something else. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The hunger, we don't really address the hunger so much. We address more commonly. We address the symptom, the thing that makes people feel uncomfortable. Oh, my husband's looking at porn. My wife's looking at porn.
We just want
the thing that makes us feel insecure. Yeah. We say, don't stop doing that. Well, what if that hunger is now going to be satiated by something else that doesn't make us feel insecure, but we haven't addressed that?
Yeah, totally. Okay. So it's like thinking through what's deeper going on here, what's driving this, rather than just looking at the surface. I know that's so hard, like thinking from a woman's perspective, like, well, you just want this thing gone, but that's not helpful in the
long run. Call the state of Texas.
That's a good point.
Tension management. This is actually a new one. This was not from the original.
The original list of
tension management. So many of us view our sexuality as a drive that needs to be satisfied. To us, it's about a cycle of tension and release. Tension builds and then seeks a release. Conceptualizing our sexuality this way will often feel angry or resentful if our needs, air quotes, aren't being met, either because we don't have a partner, or worse, the partner we do have is sexually unavailable. Again, scare quotes. This raises the likelihood that we will feel justified in seeking release elsewhere. This isn't necessarily wrong, but it's not the only way to view things. I like the idea of taking the concept of tension and using it more productively. Mm-hmm. Tension is one of our most valuable assets, but much of the time we sell ourselves short by seeking release rather than directing that tension as an energy. Mm. When you think about tension as energy, you begin to get a sense for how it can change form. When I feel tension in my body or become aware of heightened sexual fantasy in my brain, one helpful approach is to use that energy to create a gift for others. I read this in a book. It was helpful. This can help turn an inward-focused egotism into an outward-focused blessing for others. Wash the dishes, mow the lawn, etc., etc. You may find both a sense of ease as well as a heightened sense of agency and power. Rather than always seeking tension release, expand your capacity for feeling it, moving it, managing it, and creating something with it.
I like that. I've heard Dr. Julie Slattery talk about some of that. She was talking more in the context of single people, but a lot of it is like, okay, like attention, and then you want to do something with it, like, you know, so you have that sexual release rather than exactly what you're describing.
Yeah.
You use it for good, go out and give and pour out and use it to like drive you into something better almost.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This I have found to be really cool just as a mindset. Because it takes you out of this whole idea of I'm a slave to my feeling of tension. So before, as a conservative Christian, before getting married, it's like, they would tell me, work out and take cold showers and do this stuff. And what you're trying to do is like relax, bring down this tension, right? And even though that can be awesome and helpful, as a way to kind of exert. I like to do that. I find a lot of life-givingness in working out and taking cold showers. So I like that. But it used to be as a way to escape tension, not as a way to use or manage tension. Yeah. And so I love this mindset because now it becomes like a power that you have. You can actually go and do something with this and actually have that energy, sort of embody it, It's one of the reasons I like yoga. And a lot of you did do these yoga. Because you're learning how to be in the body and controlled and meeting your edge and I love the combination between the breath work and the movement. Oh, so good. And other things like that. So there are things like that have actually become really life-giving when you think of tension more as something to be managed. And, if you think of yourself as sort of a box, you're sort of expanding that box. Yeah. You're expanding your capacity for that. And by the way, tension exists in a relationship as well. And is one of the superpowers of the relationship is a healthy management of tension, not getting rid of the tension. Yes. Anger and eroticism are very they have a relation, they're very close together, emotionally. So don't be too eager to ease the anger of your spouse. You might find that, it gets better. I read that. No, I heard that from another book. Okay. Great. Shall I keep going?
Yes. And there's like huge storm blowing in. Oh my goodness.
Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Oh, I'm cracking up because I'm just like, oh, sister. I know people have very strong opinions and beliefs about certain things. So
about yoga?
I just crack up in my head. I'm like, honestly, it's like, I appreciate people who can go, oh yeah, what's the point of this conversation? I'll be like, oh my goodness, they mentioned yoga. I have to turn this off. Like, okay, if you don't agree with yoga, that's great. But we're talking about what is the point of that?
If they don't agree with me, that's okay.
Okay. No, I love these. I want to keep going.
I probably get to go ahead.
No, I like it. I don't want to distract us too much from what you're saying.
We're talking about yoga. What about Qigong? Do they like Qigong?
Hey, oh my God, little sister here.
All right. Okay, the third one, ego neediness. This is a short one. Much sexual fantasy centers around a lover who is so completely turned on by us that he or she just can't keep their body away. Our egotism longs for someone who won't just love us, but will become obsessed with us. Mm-hmm. This reveals to us a deep sense of self-centered worthlessness that we seek to constantly mask by seeking validation from people, even if it's in the world of our fantasy. Mm. Awareness of this deeply felt longing for enoughness is a gift that can lead us to focus on the cracks we feel in our identity. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if that's just me, but I that's definitely something where it's like awareness of what's happening inside and maybe where it's rooted can lead us to actually say, okay, maybe I hate myself. Maybe I am angry and that rage is constantly moving me to try to seek validation. Even if I say I can't get it from the people in my life. So I'm going to turn to this world and I'm going to imagine this beautiful
to the world of pornography.
To the world of pornography. Beautiful woman wants me. Yeah. This beautiful woman is with, and it doesn't take any intimacy. Yeah. There's no intimacy there. It's just I'm able to kind of think myself into,
fantasy.
Feeling good about myself.
But it doesn't,
it's a mask.
There's so much more going on. It's just, and it's sad because it's so addictive too. So it's like, okay, then what about tomorrow, the next day, the next day? You haven't addressed any of the deeper issues.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the next one is, this comes from one of the things Prager said, which was, men need variety. He goes, men need variety. Okay. First, I would just like to say maybe men aren't the only ones who want variety. I wouldn't want to say that if men want variety, women don't want variety. No, I just want, the same.
Well, I mean, he was talking specifically about men.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I hear that as almost like men are specifically men need variety. I'm about to say some things to kind of I have some thoughts about that.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to say, in the service of egalitarianism, if a man wants variety, doesn't a woman also want some variety?
Here's the interesting part, though. Like in our talk on fantasy and sexual fantasy that we just had on the previous episode of the Girl Defined show, we were talking about how a lot of the sexual fantasies are about other men. So that speaks to the variety thing. Like, I think women emotionally oftentimes want variety, but they just would never say it. Women aren't open about these things.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Men are like, I like all sizes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the men need variety. To speak of a marriage as not providing the variety a man wants is to place the blame onto the woman for not being enough, rather than holding the man responsible for how he is managing his sexual energy and desire. It also implies that sex is a superficial, sensory, animalistic act, and completely misses the fact that for humans, sex is just as much a collection of meanings as it is a collection of physical actions. The same touch in the same place can have an infinite number of meanings, fundamentally altering the sexual experience for both involved. So oftentimes when we talk about variety, we mean different bodies or different positions or different touch or something like that. It's like the same touch can mean a myriad of different things.
Yes.
And learn to be multi-meaning in your sexuality. You don't, oftentimes we only know how to think of it under one sort of meaning.
Yes. Oh, I know. There was a, keep going. I'm going to try to find this quote I saw.
Okay. Yeah, that's really mostly all I have to say on variety. So variety is infinite when meaning is infinite.
Well, and if you're coming from like a evolutionary perspective of like, we're just evolved animals, which is kind of what I've heard, then that for them, it's like, oh, well, that's your viewpoint, but we do not think we're just like animals,
Yeah. So there was a generation of sex researchers, Masters and Johnson, who basically put forward this idea, which was probably better than the last idea in our culture, but it was basically sex is a natural function. And they really went more towards the physical, like sex is a natural function. A lot of these people came from urology. Sex is a natural function. It's a physical thing that comes naturally. So they were trying to be positive. They were trying to be sex positive. But a lot of what that mindset tended to miss was the prefrontal cortex and the fact that for humans, sex is not like it is for animals. Mm-hmm. And that the meaning that is created with human sexuality is unique. And so when it comes to our thinking about sex, it really should be informed not simply by sex as a natural function, but as sex as a meaning-making endeavor.
Mm. So I wanted to read this quote. I don't know if you agree with this, but I really liked it. Dale Partridge. He said, "Men are worried that marriage will leave them with only one woman for the rest of their lives. That's not true. I fell in love with a 19-year-old rock climber, married a 20-year-old dog groomer, started a family with a 24-year-old mother, then built a farm with a 30-year-old homemaker. Today, I'm married to a 33-year-old woman who has joyfully endured 4 babies, 3 miscarriages, and a chronically ill husband. If your mind is healthy, you'll never get tired of one woman. You'll actually become overwhelmed with how many beautiful versions of her you get to marry over the years. Don't say no to marriage, say yes, and keep saying yes until the day you die." I thought that was really
fantastic.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Exactly. That's another dimension, is the development of your long-term, spouse opens up a whole another variety of meanings.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. The next one is intimacy intolerance. Now we're talking again about, potential causes of compulsive porn use. One of the main things that makes sex boring is that one or both partners are intimacy intolerant. They may take off all their clothes and perform physically sexual acts, but never really truly reveal who they are. In this state, it's the easiest thing in the world to assume that the problem is lack of variety. This lets one or both partners off the hook.
Mm.
There's an Ava Max song that's okay.
I have no idea.
The partner. So this is kind of a scenario, using a man as the one using porn for an example. For someone who has a husband who looks at porn, it is the easiest thing in the world to make the issue all about how he is failing to be faithful in the relationship. It would be more productive for her to begin asking deeper questions about the nature of the relationship. Porn use doesn't require intimacy. It is possible that neither partner wants to truly reveal themselves to the other. And when her husband has a porn problem, it offers the wife a convenient way to obfuscate her own intolerance for intimacy by making it about a man's problem.
Okay, I had a lot of thoughts on this one because I don't want anyone to hear everyone's sin and struggles they're responsible for 1,000%. Yeah. And so I don't when I read that one, I was like, I'll have some. I was just
go for it.
Thoughts and
so what do you think?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think it's easy. Whoever has whatever is considered the bigger problem, everything gets focused on them when there could be a lot of issues and on both sides, and we're just not willing to address them. But I think that, what I don't want people to hear is oh, well, because as a woman, we think a lot of us might think well, if I were just prettier, if I were a better wife, then he wouldn't struggle. But that's not true.
No, absolutely
so that's not
at
all what you're saying.
That's not at all what I'm saying. That. Absolutely not. No, what I'm saying is that intimacy is something that you build a tolerance for. And oftentimes porn use is a very overt when it's discovered. It's a very overt red flag, but it's often used as you have sin, so we're going to fix your sin problem, rather than saying we have a relationship problem. And the relationship problem isn't it's not like the sexual availability of the partner.
Yeah.
You need to be more available sexually. It's not that. But if a man needs to work through his issues, and a woman can't work through those issues for him.
For sure.
But in the meantime, she can be asking questions about the relationship that they have both worked to construct. To build, yeah. And the idea is I often hear, especially in conservative circles, is basically it's the sense that it's whoever's the one who's not using porn is basically the innocent one.
Yes.
And I think in a lot of ways, and this leads to my final bonus point. These last 2 points are about more about the partner and a response once porn is discovered.
Which this is a funny thing between us really quick. Yeah. I hate calling it partner. I like husband and wife. He always says partner, and so many people do that I love and respect, but I just think it's hilarious because every time I hear the word partner, I'm like,
Well, that's fine.
Yeah. So it's it would be beneficial for both people to go to counseling together to get help rather than just send them to counseling,
This is a little tricky. Yeah. So
it is tricky.
The man is going towards porn, right? To, as what I've said is basically, this is often a problem that's a symptom rooted in something deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes couples are not well matched in the sense that there's one abuser, right? Or one person who's particularly bad. But in a lot of cases, couples actually are pretty well matched. They find someone, you tend to marry someone sort of at your level of emotional development, roughly. And so So that means that if a man has emotional issues that are underlying and that are manifesting in porn use, the chances are, just from a family systems perspective, the woman actually probably has issues. It might not be porn, but it might be something else. So, for example, I'll share this final thing. Okay. And
We're
again, this is controversial. Yeah, this is controversial. I mean it to be, equal, like equal responsibility, not to take responsibility for the other person, but to take responsibility for yourself. Oftentimes when the other person has a problem, I don't take responsibility for me.
Yes.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying take responsibility for him.
Yeah.
Not at all. Like a million years, not at all.
Well, and just because there are going to be women who are listening who are like, maybe they or their husband specifically have a sexual addiction of some sort. I'll link to a lady who specifically deals with like sexual trauma, sexual addiction in relationships. She can literally help you from day one of like discovery of this. Her name's Bonnie Burns, and she runs a whole ministry for this. Strong Wives is the name of her ministry. She is devoted her life to this. Her and her husband have a whole story with this. And so they have done a ton of work to find healing and grow their marriage and grow themselves individually. And it's really cool to see them do that. So if you want someone who has like really, who is much older and wiser than us in this area, for me, I would recommend reaching out to Bonnie Burns, or I'll link her stuff so you can find it, because I just want to make sure that we point you in a direction if you're like, where do I go though to find some help with this for me and my husband or whatever,
See, this is great that I'm not the only one giving thoughts, because these are.
No, I think it's great.
I do want the balance, but I'm just sharing.
Yes,
this is what 100%. I think. This is what can happen.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring you on.
All right. Often a woman uses her children as a way to satisfy her neediness. Men can totally do this too. This is psychologically damaging for the children. So take a scenario where the husband manages anxiety through porn and a wife manages her anxiety through her children. Which behavior is more damaging? Which is worse for the children? They may be equally destructive. These behaviors may be equally destructive, but say the man gets found out. Say he begins working on his porn issue. Is the woman's destructive behavior ever found out? Not always, but people are often very well matched. So it doesn't always mean that she's going to have an issue if he has an issue. But people are often very well matched. We tend to marry a person at or around our own level of dysfunction. That means if our spouse has a problem, we probably have an equal problem with a different manifestation and all the caveats and everything. But this is just more personally what I think I've observed, in families where so often, the man is sort of portrayed as this monster who needs to be controlled. And, I'm very egalitarian when it comes to capacity for sin, that a man is absolutely capable of all kinds of sin, but a woman is also 100% capable of all kinds of sin too. And just because things fly under the radar culturally, in other words, the husband, you might find out the husband's porn issue because he's looking at porn. You might not find out about how the mother was diffusing her anxiety and triangulating, creating triangle relationships with her children until they're in therapy 20 years later,
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Yeah. So these are potentialities. These are not, it's a simple word. What am I thinking? These are not guarantees. So it's not like, he has a porn issue, therefore she also has an equal and opposite issue. It's not like that. But it's to say like these things tend to be complicated, and oftentimes our cultural narratives within and without of the church often miss a lot of these dynamics.
Totally.
So think in terms of relationships, in terms of a system, and then all of a sudden change is reconceptualized from just autonomous individuals need to work out their issues.
Yeah.
And it starts to open up some possibilities for ways of viewing the situation.
Totally. I think it's difficult because within especially conservative Christian circles, with submission being taken to wrong and unhealthy levels, there have been women who have been in very difficult and traumatic relationships and didn't have a voice, feel they could get help, feel they just had to suffer through it, and were maybe even told that. And so that's where I want to be very careful at, because there are people who could be listening who find themselves in that place and they need to go seek safety or help, or, so we want to be like very clear on that. Like the best thing to do is to go get help, no matter what the level. Like trying to work things out on your own, I would not be a fan of. Like, even if you don't think it's that big of a deal, like find a counselor, find a therapist, go to your pastor, like find someone you can talk to get help. I think that's going to be the most helpful way to gain an honest look at what's actually going on.
Yeah. There's and it's also true. There's a lot of crappy help. There's a lot of, you go to a pastor, my husband's doing this, my husband do that. And they'll be like, well, are you sexually available? Well, basically, are you asking for it? It's just terrible. They're just a lot of really awful messages that have been out there. That's why I'm coming from a more kind of egalitarian, it's true that there are power dynamics at play in many, many relationships, and they often go with certain weird Christian subcultures, conservative subcultures. Submission has been mangled into who knows what. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So there's definitely a lot of that. So I say, to whom it may concern. Yeah. Yeah, and that might not be you.
Whom it may concern. Well, and I know of a great therapist couple that you can hire, Tish Hedger and her husband. They do couples therapy together, so I can link them. Again, I mentioned Bonnie Burns. There are some great professional counselors like that I specifically know and think do a great job and won't give you like weird, creepy advice. So I can link those if you're wanting, like, you're like, I don't even know where to go. I think that would be really helpful. So at the end of the day, your take on men viewing pornography.
At the end, my take? Yeah. That was all my take.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, I think in general, it's a big problem. Yeah. Yeah. In general, it's a big problem.
And Audrey's like, I'm getting to the end of this. Yeah. She's getting all antsy.
I mean, there's a great talk that I heard on Matthew, that passage in Matthew about lust by Tim Mackey of the Bible Project. And really just going into like, you're trying to feed that, feed that fire, that hunger that wants to debase other people for your own selfishness. That's a real problem. Yeah. That's a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm getting messages because we're on our recording platform and we're going to get kicked off in 5 minutes. So I'm getting messages like, make sure you're off in 5 minutes. This has been so fun though. I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing those thoughts. This is definitely a different sort of conversation about porn and all of marriage than we've ever had on the Girl Defined Show. All right. So those of you out there, if you like it, give it a 5-star review. If you want to have Dave on again, let us know. You can also go to Instagram or at Girl Defined account and leave a comment letting us know, like, hey, I loved having y'all together, or if there are certain topics you want to hear more of. Audrey wants daddy. She's reaching. I'll give her to you. But thank you so much. Thank you, Dave. Thank you all for listening along. Can't wait to hear your thoughts, and I will see you next week.